Fantastic.
everyone. Welcome to Paradigm, the interview series where we look into the ethics of artificial intelligence and its implications for online safety and today's youth. I'm your host, Ruhani Surana, and I'm absolutely honored to introduce Dr. Andreas Stolcke, a leader in language technologies and a distinguished scientist leading the AI space. Dr. Stolcke has held senior positions at companies such as Amazon, Microsoft, and SRI, contributing to the development of large scale conversational AI and speech systems, alongside having worked on technical solutions for responsible AI concerns. He currently works to define and improve RAI policies for his current company, Uniphore, in his position as a VP and distinguished AI scientist. With decades of extensive experience in advancing the way machine models decode and process human language, Dr. Stolcke works at the intersection of trailblazing AI innovation and its deployment in the real world. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today, Dr. Stolcke. We hope you're doing well.
Thank you, Ruhani, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I especially like to address your audience, which is maybe a little bit different from the kind of folks I usually talk to, so I really enjoy this.
Thank you so much for coming on the series. Without further ado, then, let's get right into the discussion with our first question. So, in your view, what are the two most important elements in an ethical, safe, and youth integrated AI future?
Well, of course, the technology has to be safe, and by that we mean that it doesn't cause harm, and also more subtly that it doesn't have long-term negative effects on the people using it. And there's been a lot of discussion through the work of people like Jonathan Haidt about the long-term effects of being on screens too much at certain developmental stages. So those are problems which are, require some societal decisions about how to impose limitations on technology use. But so there's work on the side of making the technology safe and also enforcing it by regulations and laws and so forth. But then I would say a big part of it is also education, because right now we are not really educating people, for example, in our schools about how AI works, what its dangers are, what its limitations are, how to think about it and not to think about it, misconceptions about AI being some kind of super powerful technology where you're actually talking to something with a real consciousness and personality as opposed to just another technology. So there's misconceptions, and those could be corrected by education early on in our schools.
All right, thank you so much for that brilliant opener to our discussion today. So let's move into the second question, which is, given your extensive experience in building large-scale speech and language AI systems, where do you see the biggest mismatch between policymakers' conceptions of AI and its functionality in practice?
Um, I would say that some of the policymakers are becoming attuned to the real issues, but there is this in the sort of mind share that different issues have occupied. There is a mismatch between what the press writes about in terms of, existential risk, AI will take over the world and wipe out humanity. Those types of discussions tend to be they get a lot of clicks, but they are not really the big issues that I think we have today. Today's issues are much more down to earth. The technology is being deployed in actual products. It is being used to, for example, reduce workforces or change the way that people live and work. So things that are really more incremental in their impact, but have a huge impact on a big scale because they affect so many people. And so, if we were more attuned to those issues rather than these sort of sci-fi like discussions, I think we would benefit greatly.
For
Um,
sure. And I think that
yeah.
that's definitely something that we need to be talking about. So, from
Mhm.
your position as obviously a distinguished AI scientist, what is one piece of insight that you would like to share with the audience of the series to potentially correct for a few of those misconceptions, just as a follow up from that insight that you
Yeah. Yeah. So AI, people talk about AI like, I can chat with it, I can talk to it. People get build so-called relationships with AI, virtual girlfriends and all that stuff. I think a very dangerous misconception. AI is a very, very sophisticated tool to automate certain things, to replicate certain functionalities, like creating images and so forth that are lifelike, that where the results seem lifelike or seem to emulate the behavior of humans, for example. But these are still mechanical models in some sense, because they are governed by the algorithms underlying them, especially by the data that you train them on, because this is the big novelty in AI for the past, I would say, uh, 20 years or so, and increasingly as we look at more recent work, is that the algorithms are becoming very kind of simple, but because of their scale, they can be taught to do very complex things because we have so much data to feed them. So they can learn to emulate all sorts of behaviors, including things like reasoning and expressing what looks like real emotion and so forth. So people are tricked into believing these are real beings. There's even discussion about giving um, human rights to these artificial intelligence instances, which I think is a completely misguided discussion. So people tend to misconceive them as being lifelike, human-like in some important way, and they don't realize that it is a just an algorithm or just a model. And I think that is a fundamental misconception that, again, could be corrected through educational efforts.
Thank you so much. Let's move into the third question with
Mhm.
that. So, building off of what you mentioned about those misconceptions around AI,
Mhm.
to what extent do you think that AI platforms themselves should integrate responsible e-safety features, particularly for young users who are more impressionable at the design
Mhm.
level, as opposed to the platform layer?
Well, you should always build safety features at the design stage, right? And so, for example, when you build systems that are keep data safe and private, right? These kind of safeguards need to be thought of at the design stage. Otherwise, you cannot really retrofit them, and you always leave gaps and shortcomings. So um, you should always design for the properties of a computational system that you think are important. You shouldn't think of it as a separate thing that you can graft onto it later. So definitely at the design stage.
For
Of
sure.
course, the platforms are just means to an end. They are tools, if you will. So the platforms have to have the technological features that enable the design decisions to be implemented. But the design comes first.
For sure. And I think that's a very important message that we're seeing come up more and more in the
Mhm.
AI space, especially with AI scientists such as yourself. Okay, let's move into the final question with that. So you've made mentions of, obviously the importance of education, the importance of regulation, and the importance of safety in a design level by corporations. So
Mhm.
overall, who is it, do you think, who should bear the responsibility in terms of making AI safe and fair?
It's all of us. So the producers of AI, obviously, but also us as a society, again, through our um, efforts to understand what AI really is, how we should attribute responsibility to different elements. And it's very useful, I think, to think of analogies with things that we're very familiar with. For instance, things that we're familiar with and that can cause great harm. So, for example, medicines, cars, because cars can easily kill people. So we need to learn to operate them safely, and we need to establish laws and regulations to enforce those safety regulations, those safety measures. So think of those types of big technological advances that were made, maybe 100 years ago or 50 years ago, and how we deal with them in order to reap their benefits, but also keep them safe for people, right? So we thought of enforcing the use of seatbelts, okay, because obviously you could have said, okay, we have now these cars, they can easily kill people, so let's all drive no faster than 10 miles an hour. Obviously, that was not going to fly. So instead, we need to come up with technological solutions like seatbelts and airbags and so forth. We should, but we should all share that responsibility. We should agree to enforce certain laws. Our lawmakers need to be enabled to and pushed and incentivized to think of the interests of us, the people who use cars, and the same with AI. So we need to make everybody aware of the need for safety features, and then the manufacturers are going to be forced and incentivized to actually pay attention to these questions. But it's a societal responsibility.
For sure. And I think that what you mentioned about creating that sense of collective responsibility is obviously very important. And if I'm not wrong, that based on what you're saying, education is, a key tool to achieving that. Am I right in saying that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, that's a very powerful message to end off on. Thank you so much, Dr. Stolk, for your time. Thank you so much for your wonderful insights into the world of AI.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for bringing questions of responsible AI to everybody's attention, especially the younger part of the population.
Obviously, very important for us to think about as we move into a future that is obviously going to be more AI integrated than ever before. Thank you once again for your insight and for coming on the series.
Thank you. Bye-bye.